When you hear the word strength, what comes to mind? Do you think of physical strength so that you can protect and fend for yourself? Or do you think of mental strength and intelligence so that you can outwit the people around you so you're able to accomplish whatever you want? Maybe strength lies in how you treat the people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. Or perhaps the answer depends on the context. Regardless though, strength, by any of these definitions, has the potential to bring power to an individual. But in a world where the only thing that matters is power, what happens to those without it? And that's what I want to talk about today. So, welcome to the psychology of Fidelio, Aurelius, Magnus. Despite Fidelio and his brother Basilio growing up to become some of the highest ranking members of Louis's militia, the Magnus brothers didn't always possess this level of status and importance, and so I think we need to explore how they got here in the first place. Long before the events of the game, the two brothers grew up homeless on the streets of Grand Trad, just like so many of the Parapists who live in the city. If you've played Metaphor, then I don't have to tell you that in the United Kingdom of Uchronia, the Parapist tribe is considered to be inherently lesser than many of the other tribes in the world, with some tribes like the Clemmer or the Ishkia tribe seeing them not as people but more so like vermin that deserve to be exterminated if they exist too visibly. This meant that anyone unlucky enough to be born a Parapist, like Fidelio and Basilio, would be much more likely to struggle just to survive day to day. If we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was created by Abraham Maslow to explain what factors motivate our behavior, right now, these two are at the very base of Maslow's pyramid, as they are attempting just to meet their most basic needs of survival. It's mentioned that the brothers rarely ever knew where their next meal was coming from. Clean drinking water probably wasn't easy to come by, and in rank 3 of Basilio's follower bond with Will, Basilio references how they had essentially grown up in a trash heap, which also means that things like sleep, clothing, and warmth likely didn't come easily to them. Without any parents, this meant that all they really had was each other. And so when the Sanctist Church eventually came to them with an offer of food and money in exchange for helping them out, ultimately it was a no-brainer, and the brothers agreed to this because if they could secure their most base of physical needs, then perhaps they'd be able to move up to the second stage of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where an individual can focus on obtaining their own safety and security. And so their logic, especially while they were backed into a corner just by life, made sense in agreeing to this proposition from the church, because in their minds, at least now they won't be in the streets. They won't be wondering where their next meal will come from, and they may finally have some consistency in their lives. Though unbeknownst to them at the time, what they'd actually agreed to was signing their life away to be tortured in igniter experiments. While on a technicality, yes, they had somewhere to stay, and yes, they kinda had food to eat, they were more or less placed into conditions that could be compared to those of a concentration camp by the Sanctist Church. And while the brothers were able to bond with other prisoners like Vinca, these conditions were simply not intended to be livable, and in turn, being subjective to such intensive experimentation had long-lasting mental and physical implications on everyone who had to endure it. It's explained that this torture, for lack of a better term, caused Fidelio to completely lose his ability to grow, which is why he's so small in stature when compared with his younger brother and many of the other Parapists that we meet throughout the course of the game. If we think about it, while he thought this choice of going with the Sanctist Church would help to fulfill his safety needs, in reality, all it did was shift the setting in which they are doing anything they can just to live to the next day. Sure, they have enough of their physiological needs met to stay alive, but I'm sure safety and security could not have felt further away. They were trapped. That is, until a riot broke out, and the brothers were able to escape, though not without Basilio being gravely wounded in the process. Something that I think is worth discussing is what happens after they escape. Fidelio now needs to find someone, anyone, who will heal his brother. But what can he do? Where can a lowly Parapist go for help in a society that has been intentionally designed to treat them like less than dirt? Well, with no other options in front of him, he has to act out of pure desperation to save his brother's life. And so he goes to the only place he can think of that could have the potential to save his brother: the Sanctist Church. I don't think that the true gravity of this decision is really acknowledged in full through the game, because if you think about it, these brothers just escaped from being guinea pigs for endlessly cruel and brutal igniter experiments that led to other therapists who they likely saw as friends to either die or lose control of themselves and go feral. And despite knowing all of this, in order to save his brother's life, Fidelio goes straight back to the lion's den, to the institution that had tricked them into being test subjects in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, they would save his brother's life. If we look back at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll see that love and belonging is the third tier of the pyramid. However, there are times when this need can override the need for safety. And while Fidelio certainly does not see the church as the source of love and belonging, he will risk any hope of his own safety and security for even the chance at saving Basilio. And so this led to the brothers' arrival at the St. Firmus Church, where this gamble actually paid off because they were greeted by Rella, who had agreed to heal Basilio in full, did not turn them into the branch of the Sanctist Church that oversaw their igniter experiments, leaving them indebted to her and feeling very fondly towards her forevermore. Once they had parted with Rella, however, they soon entered into the service of none other than Louis Guiabern. But the question that's raised in my mind is, why would they follow a man who has lived such a different life from their own? Well, Louis, despite being part of the Clemmer tribe, preached to his followers his vision of a world where a person's tribe didn't matter, and instead, status was determined by an individual's merit, as in his mind, this is what would bring true equality to the world. This hope of equality, when contrasted with how the current system run by the church had failed them, caused Fidelio and Basilio to follow Louis instead. Finally, they could see a future where they could escape the bottom of the food chain despite being therapists. And to say this opportunity was life-changing for them would be an incredible understatement, because in terms of getting their needs met, Louis's army checked nearly all of the boxes. Obviously, their physiological and safety needs were met by the sheer fact alone that they were traveling with an affluent military prodigy who commanded his own private militia where power was everything, and so they looked out for their own. And he possessed what is essentially a floating palace in the Skyrunner Charadrius. It's through their relationships with each other, Louis, and eventually the songstress Juna, that the brothers undoubtedly began getting their needs for love and belonging met as well, with Basilio saying that Juna's singing is the only thing that can really pierce Fidelio's armor. And as far as their esteem needs are concerned, they've become Louis's right-hand men, with people coming to recognize the Magnus brothers from all over. And so, short of meeting their needs to reach total self-actualization, which, if you're not familiar, is defined by the American Psychological Association as being the complete realization of that which one is capable, involving maximum development of abilities and full involvement in and appreciation for life, particularly as manifest in peak experiences, they're in a really good place compared to where they were. And so I think it's fair to say at this stage in his life, joining Louis is quite literally the best thing that has ever happened to Fidelio. That is, until the Royal Tournament. But before we go any further, I need to tell you about today's partner on the video, Figgies. Ever since Metaphor ReFantazio came out, I've been waiting for good Metaphor merch. And so when Figgies sent me some free samples of their new Metaphor line, I was blown away by the quality. I've never really been a Funko guy, but I've always wanted to be a collector. And so while I have Funkos, I've never been stoked about it. But this is something that I can really get stoked on, because they send you these little pixel art guys of your favorite franchises with reversible metal backgrounds that have some chase backgrounds that could be gold, silver, or bronze, each with varying rarities. And you can put them on a stand and put them anywhere in your house. Or you can throw a magnet on the back of them and stick them to your fridge or your wall, or really any way you want to display them, you pretty much can. So, if they look cool to you, feel free to use the link in the description to get 5% off of any purchase of $50 or more when you go to the Figgies website. But with all that out of the way, let's get back to the video. When we actually meet Fidelio, he's already well established as one of Luis's highest ranking officials, and while Luis had not formally joined the race for the throne quite yet, he'd already made his intentions to take the throne abundantly well known before the tournament was even conceived. When I think about how to describe Fidelio's personality at this time, the word smug comes to mind, especially whenever he interacts with anyone that he thinks may be unworthy of his or Luis's time. And I think this brief interaction with Gladel perfectly sums up who he is as a character when we meet him.
I could have crushed that churchman like a bug, and I would have if these insolent fools hadn't.
I'm sure. Sorry, don't much care.
Despite Gladel seemingly being a staunch ally to Luis, Fidelio clearly doesn't have much of any regard for him. And shortly following this interaction, when Stroll shares that Will is also a candidate for the throne, Fidelio remains unimpressed. And while it may seem like him being aloof, I think that in reality, his experiences from earlier in his life have shaped his perception of everyone he meets. Fidelio doesn't care for or trust Gladel because he's never been given a good reason to. Everyone has an agenda, and it's easy to say one thing and do another, just like the church did so many years ago to trick the Magnus brothers into becoming their test subjects. This inherent mistrust has led Fidelio to become a very calculating and practical man, as is displayed when he interviews the party before they're able to enter the Skyrunner Charadrius in Briohaven. While he still doesn't trust us, through conversation, he can at the very least see the potential benefits of having Will and the rest of the party around. Though this would be short-lived, because when he and Basilio found Juna and Will at the top of the Skyrunner Charadrius, standing over Gladel's dead body when they should have been at the soiree, suddenly this young, promising upstart in Luis's army, while suspicious before, has become a potential threat. This moment, regardless of Juna's deflections, plants a seed of suspicion in him that he can't shake, though he's able to compartmentalize his feelings and not fully act on his suspicions without proper evidence. Unfortunately for him, however, this also means that because of Juna's involvement in this incident with Gladel, he begins to question whether or not he will be able to trust her moving forward, which is a pretty big deal, because outside of Luis and his brother, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Juna is the person who by far means the most to him in this world, as is illustrated when we're walking around the town of Briohaven before the soiree, and we can see him standing guard near her while she's out on the town. In his position, he uses his ability to compartmentalize his feelings as a defense mechanism in order to try and take stock of and approach the situations he's faced with logically while in the service of Luis. Though this situation challenged his ability to do this, as now one of the individuals he's suspicious of is someone he cares about so deeply. And this is further compounded when she begins spending all of her time with Will and his merry band of misfits, leading him and Basilio to ultimately join up with the party to keep an eye on them as they head to the Virga Islands to obtain Dracodios for Luis. This assignment would ultimately be the catalyst for him moving to the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and reaching self-actualization. I think that one of the most interesting moments in the game for Fidelio's character is when the ship gets attacked by the sea horror Homo Sabara, because shortly before this attack, Basilio had shared with the rest of the party that Fidelio had been doubting their story about what had happened to Gladel, which created a very dense atmosphere, to say the least, with that tension only being interrupted because of the much more imminent threat of the humans' attack. So they were never really able to see this conversation through to its conclusion. So when everyone decides to put aside their differences for the sake of survival, this happens.
What is that thing?
The hell are you doing? This supposed to be you helping those in need, right, Del?
Fidelio's frustration at being saved really struck me, because in Fidelio's mind, not only was he saved by someone that he doesn't trust whatsoever, but he's also likely wondering whether or not, had the tables been turned, he would have done the same for Will. Because if I had to take a guess, at this stage in the game, it's likely that at least he believes he wouldn't have. But once they inevitably do defeat the human, they all just kind of move on. That is, everyone but Fidelio moves on. Because through this attack, unbeknownst to the rest of the party, Fidelio had sustained a grave injury to his leg that he would not allow anyone to know about. So, okay, I know that strictly speaking, Fidelio isn't a cat, but based on his appearance, I can't help but draw a parallel in this moment. When cats are hurt or injured, oftentimes they will instinctually make a point not to show any signs of illness or injury, so that they won't appear weak to predators. And I don't think this is dissimilar to what Fidelio's doing. I mean, think about it. Fidelio is literally out at sea with his brother, surrounded by enemies whose immense power he had just seen firsthand on full display in that fight with the human. I don't think it's a stretch to say that instinctively he has started hiding the pain to ensure he makes it through this alive. Though I also think it's fair to point out that he could be hiding this injury out of a sense of pride. In the military hierarchy Luis had created, the only thing that matters is power. So even if he isn't concerned about the dangers of the party around him, he has been conditioned to never show weakness no matter the cost if he wants to maintain his position in this hierarchy. So once they do eventually all get to the island, everyone gets captured besides the brothers. And while it's Fidelio's desire to leave everyone but Juna in the Mustari jail, this didn't end up panning out because getting Dracodios is a bit above he and Basilio's pay grade, especially with him knowing in the back of his mind that his leg is no good right now. It's not until they were trying to escape though when he finally hits his limit with Will and company as they try to save a dying Adeni.
What, are you mad? You just broke yourselves out of that damn place.
We cannot leave him to die.
I don't understand you lot.
No, this could work out for us. He's the island's chief, right? If we save his life, the whole village might come around on us.
What are you talking about? We already know where the lance is. All we have to do now is take it.
And how about this? I'll follow him because I'm assigned to keep an eye on him. And you have to keep an eye on me because you're my bodyguards, right?
Fine. Be my guest. But if it comes down to you or the lance, you know I'll have to take the lance. Whatever happens, I can't trust anyone but my family. And my Lord Luis.
Fidelio quite literally vocalizing to himself that he can only trust his family in Luis, while we could take it at face value, shows the true inner conflict that he's feeling right now. Yes, he's saying that he would choose the lance over Juna, but this feels less like something that is written in stone, and more so him reminding himself that this is what he needs to do because he is torn internally over his loyalty to Luis and his friendship with Juna. While it's true that Fidelio can be cold and calculating to those outside of his immediate circle, I think it's fair to say that he's not and never has been evil. While his inclinations are towards preservation of himself and Basilio, as well as following the orders of Luis, and it's these inclinations that have allowed him to rationalize the death of others as necessary losses along the path to equality that Luis is supposedly forging, I don't think he relishes in making these sacrifices. Fidelio is someone who is incredibly cognitive. He's always thinking and always trying to stay one step ahead, but color him surprised when not only does the party's act of mercy in saving Adeni lead to them reaching the Dragon Temple much more easily than they otherwise would have, but it would also end up saving his life. And so when he can't keep up the facade of being alright any longer and the party takes him back to the island for treatment, he's given a lot of time to think on the doubts in his mind. He can think on the doubts of his travel companions that, if they were enemies of Luis, could have simply let him die. The The doubts of the Mustari, who he would have easily rationalized their deaths had it come to it, but now those very people he had deemed expendable are nursing him back to health. He has so many doubts, and maybe after all this time in bed, he may have actually begun doubting what he truly stands for, whether consciously or unconsciously. And so when a human finally attacks the village after the party obtains Dracodios, he finds himself on the front lines evacuating the villagers. It makes me think of Kohlberg's theory of moral development, which is defined by the American Psychological Association as being the concept that the cognitive processes associated with moral judgment develop through a number of universal variant stages. According to the theory, there are three main levels: the pre-conventional level, the conventional level, and the post-conventional level. Broadly speaking, the morally developed individuals move from a selfish concern with rewards and punishments through a reliance on fixed rules and conventional attitudes to a position of independent, principled judgment. In this theory, the three main levels are broken up into 6 stages, with 2 stages per level. And while we could go through each of these levels individually, in the context of Fidelio, I want to focus on stages 4 and 5, namely the transition from conventional morality to post-conventional morality. Because we see this shift occur in near real time from this point of the game onward. Stage 4 of moral development states that it is important to obey authority and social conventions in the United Kingdom of Uchronia. And while he clearly does not abide by or respect the rule of law upheld by the Sanctist Church in the United Kingdom of Uchronia, I think it's fair to say that he absolutely does uphold the rule of law found within the subculture of Louis's militia. In this environment, power means everything, and it operates entirely based on one's own individual merits. If a superior tells you something, then you should comply, and until you prove yourself in your dedication to the cause, your access will be much more limited. And so with Fidelio having fully bought into these ideals, I think it's interesting to see him, whether he realizes it or not, slowly begin to question this rule of law that comes from Louis's world, and almost try to remind himself who he can and can't trust. But when push comes to shove, he has to choose between self-preservation and the well-being of the Mustari villagers, who had helped nurse him back to health. And so he risks his own safety to help who Louis would likely deem to be the weak. Stage 5 of moral development is characterized by a respect for people who hold a wide variety of thoughts and beliefs. Essentially, this stage believes that laws should support the general welfare of all, and if they don't, then they should be changed to meet the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And while we're simply at the beginning of this shift, I think it's fair to say that Louis would not have done the same. Louis and many people in his employ would have seen the death of the Mustari as simple collateral damage that could have been avoided had the villagers been stronger. Kind of like how Fidelio had regarded the potential death of Edeni. This means that Fidelio's altruistic actions here in protecting the weak no longer fully align with Louis's worldview. When Rella comes to see how he's doing, she points out that while his leg is healed, his magla shows a disruption, as though he's lost or anxious. Which makes sense. Everything that he has believed since he's been saved by Louis is starting to be thrown into question. When he gets doubts into his head, he can't let them go, because it's possible that he never really bought into Louis's ideology fully. It was just the best option available to him at that time in his life, and it gave him and Basilio a place to truly belong. When it's acknowledged he saved people, he brushes it off because he isn't looking for praise. He just didn't want to see the people of the village hurt for nothing, especially after they'd saved his life. And it's from here that these doubts spiral for Fidelio. Whether he's reading this passage about equality in the protagonist's book and says that dreams are only dreams, when Basilio brings up how he'd like to open a diner if they could do anything, to when he sees the party practicing with the fake lance, which further raises suspicions in him that they may be plotting against Louis, to the doubt that Basilio vocalizes at the farewell bonfire that following Louis may not be the right path, and that Basilio is beginning to align more with the party's vision of the future than Louis's. While previously the doubts in his head were whether or not he could trust the party, I believe now the doubts he can't get out are whether or not following Luis is the right thing, and I think that's best exemplified here.
Del, what do we believe in, really? Are we absolutely positive that, you know, Count Louis's vision and ours have enough in common?
I thought we were done talking about this. He's the reason we got this far. A couple of parapus orphans. Nobody else wants us. Nobody cares about us. We'd be nothing without Count Louis.
I know, Del, but he makes all them speeches about equality, but in the end, he's gonna leave the weak to die. I heard him talk about his ideal world, and it sounds like a world where we'd have died alone in the dirt. No Saint Rella to save us. Is that what we're fighting for?
Too late for that kind of talk, brother. Blood on our hands either way.
But despite all of this, he does eventually return to Luis's side when the party hands over the fake Dracodios. Though, notably, he doesn't warn Luis that Dracodios could be a fake, rationalizing that Luis would be able to easily figure it out himself if it was a fake, so he wouldn't need to be warned. And ultimately, this led to the public death of Luis at the hands of the party, using the real Dracodios. And with this loss, he is understandably furious with Will and the rest of the party. He feels betrayed and lost, but I think that he also secretly feels like he's been freed again. While Luis has done so much for him, their visions of equality just no longer aligned, especially after what Fidelio experienced in Etria, a village that Luis offhandedly mentioned when they returned that he would have wiped the village off the map had they resisted giving him the lands, which shocks everyone, Fidelio and Basilio included. And so while this is one chapter closed for him, I believe that if we think back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this will allow him to walk the path towards self-actualization. No longer does he need to rationalize everything he does and every cruelty he commits as being part of the greater good, and forcing his beliefs to fully align with Luis's narrow and cruel view of the world as he strives for what he calls a meritocracy. When I think about Fidelio's journey, I think about a character who has faced unimaginable hardships for the sake of survival, which led him to aligning with the first person to offer a tangible prospect of change to him in such a broken world. And while Basilio has a point that in Luis's vision of the world, he would have seen the brothers left to die when they were younger. It's just that the allure of belonging and power was simply too tempting to resist after they had escaped from these awful experiments. But now Luis has served his purpose for the brothers, and with him out of the picture, they can finally move on and live their lives on their own terms. Or at least that's what they'd thought. The next day, however, when Sanctifex Foreign was about to announce his victory to the world, Luis reveals himself to be alive before everyone. And while we don't really get a moment to see what's going through Fidelio's mind at this revelation, I think it's fair to say that after having the fog of Luis's influence over him lifted, he will no longer sit idly by and rationalize Luis's cruelty as being for the greater good. Fidelio has seen Will and the party backed into corners, and he has seen that while in those corners, they never stop trying to help everyone that they came in contact with. I think that it's this moment that we can truly say he has reached self-actualization, because when Luis pointed Dracodios at an innocent family of Sanctus, even though Sanctism as a religion has caused both himself and his brother so much pain, into action to protect these innocent people, that while their beliefs are in Sanctism, they are not the ones that signed off on their torture. To reiterate, self-actualization is the complete realization of that which one is capable, involving maximum development of abilities and full involvement in and appreciation for life, particularly as manifest in peak experiences. In this moment, he realizes that he is capable of protecting others in the way that no one would protect him, but this altruism didn't come without a price.
I get it now. Only fair thing in this world is power. With it, you can take whatever you want in this life. Or so I thought.
Del.
But you know, if all the weak get left behind, who's left to protect them? I've been an idiot. Sorry about that.
Stop talking, Del.
I see it, you know. Our little diner. Music in the air. It's grand. Look after Lady Juna.
Huh? Hey. Del? Del!
In his final moments, while he wasn't able to change the world, he was able to save several lives from being needlessly taken. He reached his full potential and put the lives of others before his own. It's at this moment that he was able to stand up for what he believes in. Not Luis's misguided ideology that he had adopted because it was better than the status quo, but he decided what he really wanted was to protect the weak. Fidelio's not a character without his flaws. He's a man who did whatever he could to make the world a better place for his brother. And while I'm sure he would admit he'd done things he wasn't proud of, none of it was done without purpose. In these final moments, I think that if we were to ask Fidelio what comes to mind when he hears the word strength, I think that he would say that strength is the ability to protect the people who can't protect themselves. In the end, I'm glad that Fidelio was able to be laid to rest, knowing he was able to protect not only the lives of the innocent Sanctist children and their parents, but also the life of his brother. And while it's left up to interpretation whether it's actually Fidelio speaking to Basilio before his awakening, I feel strongly that it was. And regardless of what happens in the future, I know that Basilio will always carry Fidelio with him until they are finally reunited.
See you around, Del.